Your engine just died, at a red light, in rush hour traffic, in 100-degree heat. Mechanics call it vapor lock, and most drivers have never heard the term until it happens to them, usually on the hottest day of the year. This channel exists to catch exactly this kind of thing before it happens to you, so if that's useful, you know what to do. Today, the 5 fuel additives that make summer stalling worse, the 4 that actually stop it, and how to tell if your car is at risk before you're stuck on the shoulder. Quick fact before we start: gasoline is always trying to boil, and heat from a hot engine bay can turn it to vapor right inside the fuel line before it ever reaches the engine. Your fuel pump can't pump vapor the way it pumps liquid, and that's the whole mechanism behind vapor lock. Here are the 5 products that don't touch that problem at all, and the 4 that actually do. Octane boosters marketed as a fix for stalling and rough idle. Octane boosters sit near the front of the fuel additive aisle, often in bold, aggressive packaging, suggesting improved performance, smoother running, and better overall engine behavior. Broad enough language that a driver dealing with any kind of rough running or stalling might reasonably think this is the product for them. Octane rating measures a fuel's resistance to premature ignition, or knock, under compression. It has functionally nothing to do with fuel vaporization temperature or heat-related vapor lock. Raising octane does not raise the temperature at which gasoline vaporizes inside a hot fuel line in any meaningful, documented way for the purpose of preventing vapor lock. For the vast majority of vehicles running on their manufacturer-recommended octane rating, adding an octane booster provides no measurable benefit at all, because the engine's computer isn't tuned to take advantage of fuel it wasn't asking for. Independent testing has repeatedly found no measurable horsepower or drivability improvement from octane boosters in engines already running their recommended fuel grade. If anything, the mechanism these products are actually built around, suppressing knock under high compression and load, is closer to the opposite of a heat and vapor problem, which happens at low load in traffic with the engine barely working at all. The packaging language is deliberately broad. Smoother performance, eliminates pinging and knock, better overall engine response. Vague enough that a driver experiencing summer stalling, who has no idea what vapor lock even is, reasonably assumes this general performance product might help their general performance problem. It's marketed to solve a feeling, not a specific mechanism, which means it can be marketed to almost anyone experiencing almost any symptom, a commonly reported pattern among drivers experiencing summer stalling. An octane booster is added after a stall in traffic. The driver notices no change because the product was never capable of addressing the actual cause, and the stalling continues to recur on the next hot day, sending the driver back to the same aisle for a different, equally mismatched product. At roughly $8 to $12 per bottle, treating a single tank, an octane booster used repeatedly chasing a stalling problem it was never designed to fix can easily run $30 to $50 over a summer with zero improvement to the actual issue. Money spent addressing the wrong mechanism entirely. Generic all-in-one fuel system treatments, with no vapor pressure relevant ingredients. Complete fuel system treatment and similar all-in-one products promise to clean injectors, remove carbon deposits, stabilize fuel, and generally treat the entire fuel system in one bottle. An appealing one-stop shop pitch for anyone unsure exactly what's wrong with their car. These products are formulated primarily around detergent and cleaning agents designed to remove carbon buildup on injectors and intake valves. A legitimate function, but one that has no meaningful effect on the fuel's volatility or vaporization temperature, meaning they do nothing to address heat-related vapor lock specifically. A driver whose stalling is caused by vapor lock, not carbon deposits, will see no improvement from this category of product because the product is chemically incapable of addressing that particular failure mode. It's a genuinely useful product for a completely different symptom: rough idle from carbon buildup, reduced fuel economy from dirty injectors, being reached for by someone dealing with an entirely unrelated heat and vapor problem. All-in-one framing implies comprehensive coverage of fuel system-related problems, which creates a reasonable but incorrect assumption that if your car is running poorly in any fuel-related way, this product covers it. In reality, it addresses one specific mechanism, carbon deposits, and is silent, both on the label and in its actual chemistry, about heat-related vapor and volatility issues entirely. A frequently reported scenario: a driver treats a repeated summer stalling issue with an all-in-one fuel treatment for 2 consecutive tanks, sees no change, and only later learns from a shop diagnosis that the issue was heat-related vapor lock in a specific section of fuel line, a mechanism the treatment they'd purchased was never designed to touch. At $10 to $15 per bottle used across 2 tanks chasing the wrong problem, that's another $20 to $30 spent with zero improvement, on top of continued risk of stalling in traffic until the actual cause is identified and addressed. Ethanol treatment additives used without an actual ethanol-related symptom. Ethanol treatment additives are marketed heavily around fears of ethanol blend gasoline, E10, E15. causing fuel system corrosion, water absorption, and degraded performance, often with alarming language about ethanol damaging engines, appealing to a broad, generalized anxiety many drivers have about ethanol fuel. Ethanol treatments are chemically formulated to address moisture absorption and certain corrosion risks specific to ethanol blend fuel sitting for extended periods, particularly in engines used infrequently like small engines, boats, or seasonal vehicles. For a daily driven vehicle being used regularly with fuel that isn't sitting for months at a time, these specific ethanol-related risks are largely non-issues, and the product does nothing whatsoever for heat-related vapor lock or summer stalling in an actively driven car. The chemistry simply targets a different failure mode entirely: moisture separation in stored fuel. That has nothing to do with a fuel line vaporizing under engine heat during a normal daily commute. The marketing deliberately leans on a general, somewhat exaggerated fear of ethanol fuel that many drivers already carry, without clarifying that the specific problems this product solves, long-term storage degradation, simply don't apply to the daily commuter driving experience most customers buying it are actually having. A common pattern: a driver dealing with summer stalling sees ethanol mentioned somewhere in searches about fuel problems, buys an ethanol treatment as a broad precaution, uses it for weeks with no change in the stalling behavior because the actual cause was heat-related vapor formation, not ethanol-related moisture, an entirely different mechanism the product was never intended to address. At around $8 to $10 per treatment used repeatedly out of general precaution rather than an actual diagnosed ethanol-related issue, this becomes another line item in a summer of spending money without addressing the real, underlying stalling cause. Aftermarket fuel line. Insulation wraps, sold as a standalone DIY fix, without addressing line routing. A category of cheap, thin foam or foil, fuel line insulation wraps is sold as a simple DIY fix specifically marketed against vapor lock, appealing directly to drivers who've identified vapor lock as their actual problem and are looking for a low-cost solution. While heat shielding is a legitimate real engineering concept used by manufacturers in some vapor lock-prone designs, thin consumer-grade wraps sold for a few dollars a few feet often provide only marginal insulation value compared to factory heat shields, and critically do nothing to address a fuel line that's poorly routed too close to an exhaust manifold or other major heat source, which is frequently the actual underlying cause on vehicles prone to this issue. Wrapping a line that's simply in the wrong position provides limited real-world temperature reduction compared to properly rerouting or shielding it at the specific hot zone. A wrap applied to the wrong 3 feet of line can leave the actual hotspot, often the section closest to the exhaust manifold, and often the hardest section to reach, completely untouched. These products are marketed as complete standalone fixes with instructions that amount to wrap any exposed fuel line, without any guidance on identifying where the actual heat exposure and vapor formation is occurring, meaning a driver can spend an afternoon wrapping the wrong section of line entirely and see no improvement, having addressed a problem in the wrong physical location. A frequently reported DIY outcome: a driver wraps visible, easily accessible sections of fuel line with a purchased insulation kit, continues experiencing stalling on hot days, and later finds through a proper diagnosis that the actual vapor formation was occurring at a specific unwrapped section running directly alongside the exhaust manifold, the one section that was hardest to access and wasn't covered by the generic wrap job. A $15 to $25 wrap kit that addresses the wrong section of line provides no real fix, and the actual continued risk, stalling in traffic, remains completely unresolved, meaning the real cost isn't just the wasted product, it's the continued exposure to a genuinely unsafe stalling situation. High concentration race fuel additives used in standard daily driven vehicles. Concentrated performance additives originally formulated for racing or high performance applications are increasingly marketed to general consumers with performance-oriented branding, appealing to drivers who associate race-grade language with superior overall quality and problem-solving power. Many of these formulations are concentrated well beyond what standard daily driven engines and fuel systems, and their emissions components are designed to handle and are not formulated with heat-related vapor pressure management as a design goal at all. They're built around combustion performance under racing conditions, an entirely different engineering objective. Independent analysis of several products in this category has found concentrations of certain compounds that manufacturer guidelines for standard passenger vehicles explicitly advise against using at that level, with no benefit toward the vapor lock or stalling issue the buyer is often actually trying to solve. Racing applications are typically built around sustained high RPM and heavy load, which is close to the exact opposite of the low load, stop and go idling conditions where vapor lock actually shows up. Race grade and professional formula branding creates an impression of superior general purpose quality, when in reality these products are engineered for a completely different use case, at concentrations inappropriate for standard vehicles, sold to a general consumer audience dealing with an everyday problem. These products were never designed to address. A recurring pattern reported among general consumers. A race-branded additive is purchased hoping its professional positioning will solve a summer stalling problem, used at the concentration recommended on the bottle, with zero improvement to the actual heat-related vapor issue, because the product's engineering focus has nothing to do with the mechanism actually causing the stalling. At a premium price point, often $15 to $20 per bottle, noticeably higher than standard additives, for a product engineered around an entirely different problem than the one being experienced, this is premium pricing for zero relevant benefit, and that's before considering any compatibility concerns with standard vehicle fuel system components. Quick pause here. If you've been buying additives chasing a stalling problem and getting nowhere, that's exactly the pattern this channel exists to break, matching the actual mechanism to the actual fix, instead of the vague marketing language on the bottle. If that's useful to you, subscribing means the next mismatch like this gets caught before you spend another $15 on the wrong bottle. Here's the good news buried in all of this. Fixing an actual vapor lock problem usually costs less than the additives that don't work, not more. Most of what actually solves this is diagnosis and inspection, not a bottle at all. Here are the 4 things that actually move the needle. Proper diagnosis of vapor lock versus other stalling causes before buying anything. Drivers who switched from grabbing whatever additive looked most relevant on the shelf to first getting an actual diagnosis, checking whether stalling correlates specifically with extreme heat, stop-and-go traffic, and engine heat soak versus other patterns like cold starts or high RPM stumbling. Stop wasting money on products aimed at the wrong mechanism entirely. What's underrated here is that this diagnosis often costs nothing. It's simply paying attention to when exactly the stalling happens, which most drivers never systematically track, jumping straight to a purchase instead of 5 minutes of pattern recognition that would have saved them from 3 wrong additive purchases in a row. Vapor lock has a very specific fingerprint once you know to look for it. It almost never happens on a cold start. It almost never happens at sustained highway speed with steady airflow across the engine bay. And it almost always shows up after the engine has been running long enough to heat soak, then sits or crawls with reduced airflow. Think pulling into a gas station right after a stretch of stop-and-go traffic on a 100-degree day. If your stalling doesn't match that fingerprint, you likely have a different problem entirely, and no amount of vapor lock-focused shopping will fix it. Fuel volatility. Class-appropriate fuel purchased seasonally. Who became aware that gasoline itself is reformulated seasonally by refiners specifically to adjust its vapor pressure characteristics for the expected ambient temperature, lower volatility summer blends versus higher volatility winter blends, and who make sure they're consistently buying from stations with fresh seasonal turnover, report fewer vapor-related symptoms than those unknowingly running on old, improperly blended fuel that's been sitting in underground tanks too long. What's surprising is that this is regulated at a federal and state level specifically to reduce vapor lock and emissions risk in hot weather, meaning the fuel itself is already engineered to help with this problem. And the biggest risk factor isn't the fuel formula. It's buying from low turnover stations where fuel sits in tanks far longer than intended, allowing it to degrade past its intended seasonal spec. A high-volume station on a busy highway turns over its underground tanks far more often than a low-traffic station on a quiet back road, which means the freshness of your fuel can genuinely vary station to station even when the price and grade look identical. Heat shield inspection and proper repair of damaged or missing factory heat shields. Drivers who switched from a generic aftermarket wrap kit to actually inspecting their vehicle's factory heat shields, checking for ones that are cracked, rusted through, or missing entirely, which happens more often than most people realize, especially on older vehicles, and replacing those specific factory components address the actual engineered heat management system exactly as the manufacturer intended. The underrated part. Factory heat shields are frequently damaged or missing on used vehicles without the owner ever realizing it, sometimes removed during a previous repair and never reinstalled, meaning many vapor lock cases have a simple, specific, findable root cause hiding in plain sight, rather than requiring any additive or aftermarket product at all. A replacement heat shield is often a $30 to $60 part, and in many cases a straightforward bolt-on job, making this one of the cheapest real fixes on this entire list once it's actually identified as the cause. Electric fuel pump pressure testing and fuel pressure regulator inspection for chronic cases. Drivers who moved from cycling through additive after additive to getting an actual fuel pressure test, checking whether the fuel pump is maintaining adequate pressure under load and heat, and whether the fuel pressure regulator is functioning correctly, identified genuine mechanical causes of vapor lock-like symptoms that no additive was ever going to fix. What's underrated is that a weakening fuel pump or failing pressure regulator can produce symptoms that look identical to classic vapor lock: stalling in heat, rough idle in traffic, meaning some drivers spending money for years on vapor lock additives actually have a straightforward mechanical component issue that a roughly $80 to $150 diagnostic and repair would have permanently solved from the start. A fuel pump that's already weakening simply has less margin left to handle the added stress of heat, which is exactly why these two problems get confused with each other so often in the first place. Step back and you'll notice the same pattern running through this entire aisle that runs through the AC and battery aisles too. Broad, vague marketing language sold against specific, technical, poorly understood problems. Nobody selling an octane booster or an all-in-one treatment is lying about what's literally printed on the bottle. An octane booster does raise octane. An all-in-one treatment does clean injectors. The deception is in the gap between what a product actually does and what a stressed, uninformed driver reasonably assumes it will fix based on vague, feel-good language and prominent shelf placement next to genuinely relevant products. That gap is where money gets spent for nothing, tank after tank, summer after summer, while the actual underlying mechanical issue never gets identified or fixed. And there's a second layer to this worth sitting with. The fuel additive aisle is one of the least regulated corners of automotive retail, when it comes to marketing language specifically. Unlike engine oil, which has to meet documented industry certification standards before it can carry certain claims on the bottle, a huge share of fuel additive marketing cleans, boosts, protects, restores, has enormous room to describe a real but narrow chemical function in the broadest, most reassuring terms possible. That's not necessarily illegal. It's just designed to be read quickly, under stress, by someone standing in a hot parking lot who just wants their car to stop dying in traffic. The bottle doesn't need to lie. It just needs to avoid being specific enough for you to realize it doesn't apply to your actual problem until after you've already paid for it and tried it for 2 tanks. Quick note before the action plan. If you've stuck around this long, you clearly care about not getting caught out by this stuff, and that's genuinely the entire reason this channel exists. A comment telling us which of these 5 products you've personally tried and whether it actually helped does more for what we test next than almost anything else, so drop that below if you've got one. Here's exactly what to do if your car is stalling or stumbling in summer heat. First, note the actual pattern. Does it happen specifically in extreme heat, in stop-and-go traffic, or after highway driving, then idling? Because that pattern points toward vapor lock specifically, not a generic fuel problem. Second, skip the additive aisle entirely until you've confirmed that pattern. No bottle fixes a mechanical or design issue. Third, have a shop inspect your factory heat shields for damage or missing components. A 5-minute visual check that costs nothing at most shops doing other work. Fourth, if the pattern is chronic and heat shields check out fine, get a fuel pressure test to rule out a failing pump or regulator before spending another $1 on a bottle. And fifth, buy fuel from higher turnover stations, especially in extreme heat, to avoid fuel that's degraded past its proper seasonal blend sitting too long in underground storage. None of these 5 steps involve buying anything from that additive aisle at all, and that's really the point. The fix for a heat and mechanical problem is inspection and diagnosis, not a bottle, no matter how confidently that bottle is marketed. One more thing worth adding to that plan, keep a simple mental log of when the stalling happens. Time of day, outside temperature, how long you'd been driving, whether you'd just been idling or crawling in traffic. That single piece of information, brought to a shop, turns a vague "my car sometimes stalls" complaint into a specific diagnosable pattern a technician can actually chase down on the first visit instead of the third. The one thing to remember, vapor lock and summer stalling is a heat and mechanical problem, not a chemistry in a bottle problem, and no amount of additive marketing changes that basic physics. If you've had your car stall in traffic on a brutally hot day, or you found the actual mechanical cause after wasting money on additives first, tell us about it in the comments. That's exactly the kind of real-world pattern that shapes what we test next. And if this saved you from grabbing the wrong bottle off that shelf, go back and catch our breakdown on AC recharge kits and summer battery brands. Because if your car's fighting you this summer, there's a good chance it's one of these 3 systems. And now you know exactly what to check first. 3 systems, 3 summers worth of the same shelf full of products marketed with the same vague language, aimed at the same overheated, stressed out driver who just wants the car to work. Once you know what to actually look for in one of them, you start spotting the exact same pattern in the other 2. And that's really the whole point of this channel.